straight to breaking news on this story. We're hearing in the last few moments that this monster hurricane has made landfall in the last few moments in Jamaica. We are hearing that it is hit in the southern western part of the islands near New Hope, with estimated maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour. That's 295 kilometres an hour. And that is extraordinary because over the last couple of hours, as it's edged towards Jamaica, it has actually been increasing in terms of wind speeds. We'd have talked about 170, 175 miles an hour, but it is increasing to 185 miles per hour as it makes landfall near New Hope. And we're hearing from the National Hurricane Centre, it is extremely dangerous and life-threatening, this situation. Do not leave your shelter as the eye actually passes over, as winds will very, very quickly and rapidly then increase on the other side of the eye. Well, the latest from the National Hurricane Centre. Let's speak to Pierre Chevalier, who's on holiday in Jamaica. Thank you so much for being here live on the programme. Just give me an idea of what it is like where you are and actually where on the island you actually are.
We are about 40 minutes west of Montego Bay. It's very, very scary now. The winds have been increasing rapidly and we can just hear everything banging, door bangings. We barricaded up the doors with a footstool and sofas and the patio doors. And it's just very, very scary.
Tell me more about the sounds that you're hearing, because so many of the people I've been talking to over the last few hours have been absolutely underlining the point just how scary it is as this hurricane has been approaching, the sorts of things they actually hear.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear, there's coconuts falling off the palm trees, all the branches are falling off. It's just surreal. I've never experienced anything like it. In the UK, when we had winds or strong winds, nothing compares to this.
And where are you? Are you actually in a hotel, in a shelter? Because yeah, we were hearing from the authorities they were still trying to get people into the shelters.
Yeah, we're in a hotel and been told since yesterday after dinner time to stay in our rooms. And once it hits landfall, to go into a bathroom and keep safe in the bathrooms.
And how long have you been there on the island? Because I said that you're on holiday. When did you arrive? Had you hoped to be leaving already?
No, so we arrived on Saturday. We were in two minds about getting on the actual flight, although the crew and the pilot assured us that they were confident that it should go ahead. So we went with that, and now I really wish that we hadn't gone.
Yes, I'm not surprised, because the authorities have been saying that actually nobody has lived through a hurricane of this power, a Category 5. So everything that they've experienced, even in Jamaica in the past, has been a lower category, even ones that have killed dozens of people. So in many senses, they simply do not know what to expect. Now, I suppose for you sitting there in your hotel room, that's exactly what you must be feeling. You simply do not know what is going to come in the next few hours.
Yeah, and I think that's what has worried us since last night is the waiting and see what's going to happen. And it's a very, very stressful situation to just be waiting and for it to pass. And it's the unknown.
What have the hotel owners been able to help you with, tell you, and also give me an idea of all of the people at home? They must be really worried for you. They'll be watching you now on the screen giving an interview like this, but yeah, how difficult has it been communicating with them back home?
So at the moment back home, it's been fine. We WhatsApp my friends. I have my dad in Denmark, and yeah, it's trying to keep up to date, but it's just the waiting and it's the unknown that is really, really scary. I mean, I'm shaking. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I'm shaking all over with nerves because you just don't know what's going to happen.
And who are you there with?
I'm here with my 15-year-old son, so it's just me and him.
And that's difficult, isn't it? Because presumably you're trying to keep him calm when you're not calm.
Yes, exactly, which is very hard. But it's the unknown, and I think I can't even. I tried to get hold to with some staff at the hotel to see, because we have water coming through the window, even though that we're on the first floor. But there's nobody we can contact. They can send messages to us, but we can't seem to contact anybody at the hotel.
And you've got no choice as it stands
No,
now, but
no,
to just
no,
sit
no.
there and sit this one out.
Yeah, correct. And yeah, I just wish we had never gone on that plane.
Just a final thought, because in terms of we're running pictures at the moment and it's certainly getting gloomier. Have you felt it closing in the last couple of hours? Because certainly as we've been sitting here watching the different pictures from different parts of Jamaica, it has got darker, the storm looks more powerful, everything about it looks more ominous. Is that how it feels with you?
Totally. I mean, this morning around 6, 7 o'clock, it was very, very windy. And first I thought, oh, is this it? But now it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And now, I mean, I'm even scared to look out of the window because I really don't want to see how bad it is anymore.
Well, Pia, we will leave it there, and good luck to you in the next couple of hours. I hope it gets a little easier to actually cope with. But Pia Chevalier, who's there on holiday, speaking to us live here on the programme. I made the point a little earlier that it has made landfall. I want to actually just play you some pictures from about an hour or so ago, because the edge of the storm did hit the southern part of the island, and these were pictures sent in to the BBC from Rebecca Allen, and you can see there, even before it made landfall, just the storms. And we'll take that strap away and you can get a better view, because the arches, you can see just the winds lashing at the trees, and different people I've been speaking to through the course of today's programme saying that after this hurricane they anticipate the whole of the landscape on the island to be different because of the intensity, the power of what is about to hit. But you get just a glimpse of that. That is before actual landfall from about 60 minutes ago.
Hurricane Melissa is taking direct aim at Jamaica, with tourists stranded on the island and residents hunkering down.
We are real worried because it might just rip the whole place apart.
Melissa has already claimed lives there ahead of its arrival.
We've had 3 deaths related to the preparation of the storm.
Even before the powerful storm's arrival, its presence is being felt.
We will have a storm surge above 17 feet in many areas. We will have between 30 and 40 inches of rain in many areas. And you will have 160-mile-an-hour winds. That is a risk to life, livelihood, and to even modern infrastructure.
Winds whipping up and the rain coming in, water washing over this bridge.
Hurricanes sound horrible outside. It just sounds as if somebody's pouring buckets and buckets of water.
This stunning satellite image capturing lightning flashes inside Melissa's eye wall. The storm so powerful, even a NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft had to turn back. Local shelters taking in those at risk, and Americans from the Cajun Navy on standby to help out.
There's going to be people could be trapped for months. This storm is more powerful than Hurricane Maria, more powerful than Katrina.
While some tourists left the island, others forced to ride out the storm.
You know, I got my wife and kids here, also got my mom, my parents. You know, as long as we get through the wind and the rain and everybody is safe, that's all I ask for.
Yeah, and really, it's so eerie at moments. You can hear the wind starting to howl. And as far as help and resources getting on the ground, one thing to note, here in Kingston, the airport is barely above sea level. So that could be a real challenge if you start to see some of that storm surge. And the roads and infrastructure here could be a real mess after Melissa passes.
Joining us now from Kingston, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us today. You say that you're worried about the island's ability to withstand this storm. Explain exactly why.
Well, there's no island in the Caribbean, in fact, this entire region, where the infrastructure could withstand a Category 5 hurricane without significant damage. We went through Beryl last year. We had an impact with Beryl that was a Category 4. And we had significant damage to infrastructure, particularly roofs, our road network, our electricity grid. But since then, we've learned, and we have improved our infrastructure, particularly our electrical grid, our communications network. But our road infrastructure would be severely impacted by a Category 5. In terms of residential infrastructure, without doubt, there will be a number of roofs lost, possibly total loss of housing in the areas that are specifically impacted, which would be the southern end of the island, specifically the parish of St. Elizabeth, and possibly even greater damage in Westmoreland, Hanover, parts of Manchester, St. James, and Trelawney. So we are expecting that there will be significant damage, even catastrophic damage, but our preparations and our plans for the immediate recovery have been well put together and well executed. So we expect that we will be able to mount a humanitarian and relief program immediately after. Of course, thankfully, the international community has come on board in a big way. And we have commitments of support already established. So we should be able to launch our recovery process very quickly after the storm is passed.
Can you give us a sense of how things stand right now, what the weather is like outside, and where you're coming to us from?
Well, I'm in Kingston, and there are squalls, high winds at times, and now consistent rainfall. We have some reports of flooding. But the real area, the ground zero of this event, is in the southwestern end of the island. So parts of Clarendon, which got the brunt of the Hurricane Beryl last year, would be getting some impact again this year. And St. Elizabeth, as I had mentioned before, that's where the hurricane would have made landfall. We have heard that winds are over 165 miles per hour. There's really nothing that can withstand that kind of wind without damage. So we have already conceded that there will be significant damage in the path that the eye would take, and we are prepared to address those issues as they arise.
The housing stock in Jamaica is greatly varied. There are some, very sturdy structures, and there are others that really aren't much more than some corrugated roof panels. Have you been able to get to those places where people are in particularly vulnerable housing or situations and convince them to get into shelters?
Well, this storm lingered on the coast of Jamaica for a few days. And even before that, we started our preparation in informing our citizens. There is no citizen that can say that they were not properly informed of the danger. I believe we scaled the intensity and severity of the storm to what is actually occurring now. So no one can say that they were misled or they underestimated it. We did put in place a mandatory evacuation order. We provided buses, and we have over 800 shelters, most of which are activated. The last time I've seen we're seeing now an increase in take-up of persons going to the shelters, but not to the extent that we would be satisfied that those who really need the shelter took up the shelter facility. So there are Jamaicans now who are in harm's way by virtue of the decisions that they would have made. My advice to them now is to stay inside, protect life. There's very little that can be done now in a Category 5 storm where the impact is direct that could save property. So let's keep safe. As soon as possible, we are positioned to conduct search and rescue and other humanitarian relief, and to clear roads to give access to communities that may have been marooned as a result of this.
Do you foresee this being a problem for the entirety of the island, or just as you were talking about, the Southwest being hit the hardest?
Well, again, just to scale the impact, all of Jamaica has been declared a disaster area under our legislative framework, which empowers the government to put certain measures in place, including emergency measures. So this means that all of Jamaica is experiencing some form of impact of a natural disaster. So where I am in Kingston, where the impact is less, as I said earlier, it's rain and wind, some amount of flooding, minor landslides. I have not heard much about roofs being dislocated or structures damaged. But as you move to the south of the island, the impact will be far worse. And the reports I've gotten from the heads of the agencies responsible for our disaster preparedness and the elected representatives of the area is that St. Elizabeth is particularly impacted. The Black River area, which is the capital of that parish, that has been severely impacted. I will be getting reports later on as the storm moves across the island. It is a slow-moving system. And so this is another dimension of the hurricane which we have to pay attention to, that the longer it stays, the more water it will shed on the island, and the longer the winds will stay, so the greater the impact. So the area of direct impact, ground zero of this hurricane, there will be devastation.
Yeah, we just really hope that something happens, it moves faster, and it gets out of your way sooner, and people are able to get out if they decided to stay. In terms of what you're expecting once the storm does pass, you say you have everything in place. You believe that you're well positioned. How long are you prepared to need to supply emergency services, emergency food, emergency housing, emergency power and water to your people?
So we expect that our electrical grid should be back up and running within weeks in the areas that are impacted. The precautionary measures were taken. We expect that our communication grid will be up and running. But the humanitarian assistance, the relief assistance, we have made the provisions. They are in, we have pre-positioned them as well. So we should be able to immediately execute that, including search and rescue operations. What we're doing here is to ensure that our local bureaucratic system works efficiently so that we can get the relief in and partner with the international community to ensure that the relief is distributed quickly and fairly and transparently to all our citizens. So that's the effort right now, to make sure that the humanitarian relief efforts and the search and rescue efforts, that those can kick in immediately or as soon as possible. There is an opening for that to be done. The recovery phase, we have already started to work on that, and that would mean getting our roads up, whatever infrastructure was damaged for trade, that would mean our airports and ports, get our hotels back, and agriculture. We already have a plan in place to ensure that our recovery is much faster, and to ensure that the rebuilding, which is the long-term strategy, that is also undertaken in a simultaneous way.
Well, a little bit of good news is Starlink says it's offering free internet access, internet capabilities to anybody impacted by the storms. It does sound like you have thought well through this and that you have everything you could possibly have in place and made all the warnings and announcements you could have made. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for taking time today to talk to us, and we do wish you...
Well, if you give me a couple more seconds just to say to my citizens,
yes,
stay inside. Now is not the time to try and save property. Batten down in your house or wherever you are, take shelter, protect life. The preparation will lessen the disaster impact, and we will recover stronger than before. Let's keep praying for the best.
Well said. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. Prime Minister Holness, I appreciate your time, sir. Good.
The evening air in Caracas was tense as President Nicolas Maduro appeared on state television, his tone unyielding, his words deliberate. Behind him, the Venezuelan flag stood tall, its colours vivid against the solemn setting of the Miraflores Palace. The announcement that followed would ripple far beyond Venezuela's borders. He declared in a firm voice, "I have approved the precautionary measure of immediately suspending all effects of the energy agreement and everything agreed upon in this matter. It is a precautionary measure that I have the authority to take as president, and I have approved and signed it. Everything is suspended. With that statement, President Maduro abruptly halted one of the most strategically sensitive energy accords in the Caribbean, an agreement that had linked Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago in a delicate balance of gas development, regional diplomacy, and shared economic interest. The reason, he said, was not a technical issue or a trade dispute, but something far deeper, a perceived act of provocation. Trinidad and Tobago, a small island nation just miles off Venezuela's northeastern coast, had welcomed a visiting US Navy warship. For Caracas, that gesture was unacceptable. In the same address, Maduro accused Trinidadian Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar of crossing a red line. "We have maintained this energy agreement," he said, his voice rising with emphasis. "But given the Prime Minister's threat to turn Trinidad and Tobago into an aircraft carrier of the American empire against Venezuela and South America, we are left with only one alternative." That alternative was suspension, an immediate freeze of all cooperative projects under the bilateral gas accord, including joint exploration in the Dragon gas field, which had long been touted as a symbol of regional cooperation. For years, Venezuela and Trinidad had worked together on this venture, navigating complex US sanctions, export permits, and multilateral approvals. The deal had allowed Trinidad to process Venezuelan natural gas through its Atlantic LNG facilities, offering Caracas a way to monetize its resources despite international restrictions. Now, with a single order, that pathway was shut. The announcement landed like a diplomatic thunderclap across the Caribbean. Analysts quickly noted that the decision was not merely economic, it was deeply political, reflecting the sharp tensions between Washington and Caracas that continue to define Venezuela's foreign policy. In recent months, relations between the United States and Venezuela had fluctuated between cautious engagement and renewed hostility. Washington had eased some sanctions on Venezuela's oil sector earlier in the year, but talks over electoral conditions and human rights had stalled. Maduro's move now signaled that Caracas was hardening its stance again. The presence of a US warship in Port of Spain was, from Trinidad's perspective, routine, part of joint maritime cooperation on counter-narcotics and regional security. But in Venezuela, it was viewed through an entirely different lens. Maduro and his advisers saw it as a direct military gesture by the United States in their near waters, one that undermined sovereignty and threatened what Caracas calls the peaceful zone of Latin America. State media in Venezuela framed the event as a provocation disguised as partnership, replaying footage of the American vessel docking in Trinidadian ports, accompanied by local officials. The imagery was used to reinforce the government's message that US military presence in the Caribbean was not an act of goodwill, but part of a larger plan to encircle Venezuela politically and militarily. As the broadcast continued, Maduro accused Washington of using small nations as instruments of pressure. "They have turned our neighbors into staging grounds," he said, "but Venezuela will not bow to threats." The suspension of the gas accord also touched on a broader narrative, one Maduro has maintained for years, that Venezuela is under siege by imperial forces. The rhetoric, though familiar, found renewed intensity in this context. With global attention focused on oil markets and energy realignments, Caracas framed its decision as both an act of defiance and defense. Inside Venezuela, the reaction was mixed. Supporters of the government cheered the decision as a patriotic stand against foreign meddling. Opposition figures, however, warned that it would further isolate the country economically. They pointed out that the gas deal had been one of the few remaining windows of international cooperation, providing much-needed revenue to a struggling state-owned energy sector. Economists estimated that suspending the deal could cost Venezuela tens of millions of dollars in lost potential exports each month, while Trinidad and Tobago could face delays in securing new gas supplies to feed its LNG plants, facilities that support a large part of its national economy. But for Maduro, the calculus appeared to go beyond economics. In his speech, he invoked historical grievances, referencing decades of US interventions in Latin America, from Panama to Grenada, from Cuba to Chile, and positioned Venezuela's decision as part of a long tradition of resistance. "We have seen this pattern before," he said. "They come with ships and promises, but their goal is always domination." International observers quickly reacted. Within hours, statements began to emerge from regional organizations and foreign ministries. The Caribbean community, CARICOM, urged restraint and dialogue, expressing hope that both nations could return to the negotiating table. In Washington, officials described Maduro's accusations as baseless and reaffirmed that the U.S. naval visit to Trinidad was a routine security cooperation exercise. For Trinidad and Tobago, the diplomatic fallout posed a challenge. Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar, who had recently met with American naval officers to discuss maritime security and counter-trafficking operations, faced the delicate task of balancing regional alliances with national interests. In a press conference following Maduro's speech, she emphasized that Trinidad's cooperation with the United States is not directed at any neighboring nation and that her government remains committed to peace and constructive engagement. Still, the Venezuelan president's words carried political weight across Latin America. Maduro's government has often used foreign military movements as rallying points for domestic unity, portraying Venezuela as a target of external aggression. Analysts noted that the timing of his announcement, coming just weeks after fresh reports of U.S. reconnaissance activity in the Caribbean, appeared calculated to reinforce that image. Meanwhile, within Venezuela's energy sector, the suspension raised practical concerns. The state-owned oil company, PDVSA, had been working closely with Trinidadian entities to develop cross-border gas pipelines and export frameworks. Those plans were now on hold indefinitely. Engineers and project managers described the order as a total freeze, not only halting physical work, but also stopping the flow of technical and financial data between the two nations. In the oil-rich coastal region of Sucre State, workers at the Dragon Field spoke of uncertainty. For many, the project had been a rare symbol of progress amid economic hardship. Now, machinery lay idle, and contracts were suspended pending further instruction from Caracas. Political analysts observed that Maduro's decision also fits into a broader pattern of Venezuela's foreign policy, one that seeks to reaffirm sovereignty through confrontation when under perceived threat. Over the years, Caracas has suspended or redefined multiple international agreements whenever tensions with the US or its allies escalated, from joint anti-narcotics programs to investment treaties. In this latest episode, the symbolism was unmistakable. By framing the suspension as a precautionary measure, Maduro was asserting his authority not just as head of state, but as protector of national dignity. The language he used, "It is a precautionary measure that I have the authority to take as president," underscored both the constitutional and emotional dimensions of his decision. Diplomats in neighboring countries quietly expressed concern that the standoff could expand. Venezuela and Trinidad share not only maritime borders, but also complex social and economic ties, including migration and trade. A prolonged freeze could affect shipping, fishing rights, and regional energy flows. For the United States, the incident represented a new point of friction in its Caribbean outreach strategy. Washington has sought to deepen partnerships with small island nations as part of its regional energy security initiatives, offering joint military and humanitarian programs. The arrival of a US warship in Trinidad was intended as a symbol of cooperation, but from Caracas, it was seen as a symbol of encroachment. Regional experts noted that this episode reveals the fine line Caribbean nations walk between engagement and alignment. For Trinidad and Tobago, maintaining defense cooperation with the US is standard practice. Yet for Venezuela, it becomes a geopolitical flashpoint. The proximity, barely 11 kilometers separating Venezuelan and Trinidadian waters, makes every gesture amplified. In the days following the suspension, Venezuelan state media doubled down on coverage, emphasizing sovereignty and regional independence. Commentators framed the issue as part of a wider confrontation between Latin American self-determination and US military projection. Government-aligned newspapers featured headlines like "Caracas defends its waters" and "Maduro draws the line." At the same time, diplomats from both sides were reportedly engaged in quiet back-channel discussions, exploring ways to diffuse the crisis without public escalation. For Trinidad, the priority was to keep communication open. For Venezuela, it was to secure a public acknowledgement of respect for its sovereignty. Energy analysts warned that prolonged political uncertainty could deter future investment across the region. The gas fields straddling Venezuelan and Trinidadian territory represent one of the Caribbean's most promising untapped resources, holding billions of cubic feet of natural gas that could power industries and generate export revenue. The longer the suspension lasts, the more difficult it will be to revive confidence among international partners. Meanwhile, in Caracas, Maduro's address continued to dominate airwaves. His rhetoric, filled with nationalistic defiance, was replayed across television and radio. Crowds gathered in central plazas, waving flags and chanting slogans of solidarity. In the government's narrative, the suspension was not a setback, but a reaffirmation of independence. International reactions varied. While some Latin American governments avoided taking sides, others quietly signaled sympathy toward Venezuela's position, reflecting enduring skepticism of US influence in the region. Cuba, Bolivia and Nicaragua expressed public support, praising Caracas for defending the dignity of Latin America. In contrast, European diplomats urged calm, with the EU's External Action Service calling for restraint and renewed dialogue on shared energy interests. Behind closed doors, energy companies expressed frustration that geopolitics had once again disrupted progress in the Caribbean's gas sector. For Venezuelans, however, the story was familiar. Decades of sanctions, diplomatic standoffs, and economic blockades have made confrontation with Washington almost routine in political life. What was new this time was the direct involvement of a neighboring Caribbean nation, a country that had long been seen as a friend, not a foe. As the sun set over Caracas the following evening, the streets echoed with mixed emotions. Some saw the suspension as a principled stand against imperial pressure. Others viewed it as another blow to a nation already struggling with inflation, shortages and emigration. But regardless of opinion, few doubted that the move had reshaped Venezuela's regional dynamics once again. President Maduro, meanwhile, appeared resolute. In subsequent remarks, he doubled down, saying Venezuela would review all energy and security cooperation in the Caribbean region to ensure no further acts of aggression were tolerated. He called on other Latin American nations to reject what he described as military colonization by foreign powers. As diplomatic cables moved quietly between capitals, one thing became clear. The suspension was not merely an administrative act. It was a message, one sent across the Caribbean and beyond, that Venezuela, despite isolation and sanctions, still wields influence and intent. For now, the gas pipelines lie still, the agreements unsigned, and the waters between Venezuela and Trinidad calm but uneasy. Yet beneath the surface, a familiar current runs of power, pride, and the perpetual struggle over who truly commands the Caribbean's future. And as President Nicolás Maduro concluded that night's address, his voice carried both warning and conviction, a tone that has come to define his leadership.